Okay, so today I'm going to be tying a dry fly that's called the pheasant tail variant. And I'm going to start with rust colored thread. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start about a third back from the eye, and I'm going to lay that thread flat. I'm using UTC thread, and I'm going to do touching wraps about to the point of the hook, and I'm going to let it hang down like a plumb bob and cut off my tag end. From here, I'm going to take some badger hen, because the tail is as long as the body, and with hen it gives me a longer fiber to work with. Pull it straight off from the stem, and then measure up the length, pinch, and now put it right on the 45 angle and give it one wrap, and make sure that your tail is up on the top of that hook shank on both sides. So I've kind of rolled just a wee bit. There we go. And now from here I'm going to go, and notice my thread now is hanging right there at that hook barb right in front of it, and that's where I want to keep my tail tied in, because I don't want it to hang down. I want it to come straight off that hook shank. So from here I'm going to hold that tail and just do touching wraps forward, keeping everything nice and smooth all the way up to my tie-in point. And you can see that I'm not pulling really hard, but what I am doing is I'm watching the length of the body, which is what I'm creating now, and I want it to be 2/3 of my hook shank. So what I'm going to do now is I don't want to create a cliff. I'm going to pull up and cut off from the front like this. And now what you can see is I've created a nice angle to continue wrapping forward and keep everything smooth all the way down to that hook shank. The head of the fly is one eye behind, so I got to keep in mind that distance. So from here I'm going to wrap back just a few turns, and I'm going to take my silver wire, and since it's wire I'm going to kind of stroke it and get any kind of kinks out of it, and that way I know that it's not going to break. So from here I want to keep it on the bottom of my fly, so I turn the hook upside down and I do it just like that, and I do a couple of wraps, and then if you can see I'm going to pull the tag and I'm going to rotate right around, and I'm doing those touching wraps again, and I'm keeping the wire directly on the bottom of that hook, and I'm going to make sure that everything stays on the bottom, and I want my wire to touch the hook shank at the bend. So I'm going to kind of pull it back a little, and I'm going to do my touching wraps all the way back to the tail, keeping this body very smooth. And now my thread hangs right in front of the barb, and I'm going to make sure that we're on the bottom. Yes. Okay, I'm not too worried about this front tag right now. We'll take care of that. And we're going to give it one more wrap, and now we're good. So now from here we're going to take our pheasant, and we're using a ring neck pheasant male tail, and I've soaked this in water so that it doesn't break so bad, because it is an older tail. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to pull my fibers, and I'm going to take about 5. This is a size 14 hook, so I don't want to take too many, but I also want to be able to have plenty to hold on to while I'm wrapping. So this time I'm going to take the tips of that tail, or that feather, not the butts, and I'm going to tie the tips in, as you can see. Now because I've got them wet, I can actually keep them all together. So from here I'm going to put them at a 45, and I'm going to wrap a couple, And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull those tails, those tags right up under there. And notice how as I'm wrapping, I'm doing touching wraps. And I'm grabbing all of that. And I'm going to stop right about where I want my body to stop. So because I wrap this in on my side, going over the top in the direction I'm going to tie it, then I feel like it won't have a tendency to break. So I'm going to capture all of it with my right hand. But since I want my wire to start right there on the back, I'm going to pull my wire in a 40 in an angle to where it holds that fibered pheasant tail right on the edge of that body. And I'm just going to go ahead and do touching wraps with that pheasant tail. I didn't twist it like some guys do. I like to see the fibers of that pheasant tail protruding out like barbules from a hackle. And I'm going to wrap all the way forward, keeping my body nice and smooth. It's very important to keep that body smooth. And as I get to where that end of the wire is, meaning I'm now getting up into the thorax, I'm going to go ahead and continue wrapping one more time. But this time, I'm going to follow it with my thread. And it comes right up on top. And my thread is actually tying it in. But I'm not going over the top of my thread. I'm wrapping forward over the top of the pheasant. Once I get to the end here where I want it to stop, and the end of it is actually where the head of the fly will be, I'm going to go ahead and give it a couple of wraps, but I have to counterspin my thread. I want it to stay in a rope style. And there you go, nice and smooth. And I'm going to wrap back to what I call 1/3 right there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to counter wrap my wire. And since I started it where that pheasant is, I can continue. Make sure that your wraps are nice, evenly spaced, and there are 4 to 5 wraps. I personally prefer 5. So I'm wrapping forward, watching. There's 4, and there's my 5th one. And now I'm not going to stop wrapping. I'm going to continue up into the thorax. One more wrap, and now I'm going to come up. And the reason for that is because I don't want to move my number 5 wrap in the direction of the eye when I break it off. So I want to tie it down nice and snug. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and this one here is my 5th. That's number 6. So I'm going to reach in with my thumbnail, and I'm just going to helicopter this off. But please remember, when you're doing that, you're pulling on the wire. And if you didn't do your number 6, you could have a tendency to pull this one wrap forward off in a slant. Lay that tag back down backwards if you can do that. I'm using my thumbnail. And I'm going to come right over the top with it. Now my goal is to go ahead and cover up my number 6 and continue forward, creating a nice foundation for my hackle. I don't want a ledge, and I'm just creating a nice foundation. Notice that the head of the fly is actually starting to be formed also. I'm kind of doing 2 things at once. And so now I'm going to leave my thread hang right there, and I'm going to go ahead and get my hackle, and I'm going to take this hackle now, and I'm going to splay it out, and I'm going to kind of lay it right here on top, or actually even with the shank, and I'm going to look, and that's really close to 1.5 of my hook gap, and that's very good. Now, a lot of guys will tie them with the dull side up. I'm going to go ahead and tie this one dull side down, and I'm going to make sure I have enough gap between the barbules here and the hook shank to start my wrap forward, simply because I don't want to trap any barbules. And if you notice, down here is my stem. I'm going to continue wrapping that forward now, and create a nice head for my fly and a nice smooth not falling off foundation for my hackle. Now here's one of the things I want to do. I see my number 5 wrap now, and when I wrap over this head, I'm watching that hackle, and I want to make sure that it does not drop over the top of that number 5 wrap. And I'm going to do touching wraps all the way forward for almost that third, like I said earlier. But what I'm doing is I'm watching my wraps touch each other, and I'm watching the head of this fly. I don't want to crowd the head, and I'm going to come up, and with my thread, it's hanging right there at the base of that stem. And now I can come all the way around. So if you noticed, I haven't captured any barbules under this wrap. I'm going to give it another one. And the reason for that is because I tied it in with the dull side down, and there's nothing leaning forward on my hackle. And the reason I did that again is because I didn't want to trap any barbules here. But what I look for when I do this is I look here on the hackle, and I look for this cup. You can see how the barbules are cupping around the stem. If it's got a really severe cup and you wrap it dull side forward, you're going to have a tendency to capture your fibers. And since my feathers right now have such a hard cup on it, where it's cupping like this, then I'm wrapping it this way, because you can see, because of the cup, my fibers are sticking straight out and leaning in forward and backward position without having to twist that stem. And that was what my goal is. So from here, I'm going to cut my stem right there at the head. And notice how my thread's hanging down. I don't want to create any kind of cutting of my thread. I'm cutting on top the hook. So now I'm just going to go ahead and complete the head, and I'm going to make a nice taper. I need to counter spin some more. I'm spinning my thread, but I'm pushing it back like this in my fingers. And the reason for that is I don't want to take a chance of it falling off the edge of the hook. If that were to happen, likely it's going to undo the entire fly. So from here, I've now got a nice head, nice size, and I'm going to go ahead and continue making it until I feel good about the size. So I'm kind of falling here. I'm going to push this back just a little, and what it's doing is it's falling off the stem that I cut for the hackle. So from now, I'm going to go ahead and whip finish. And when you do this, make sure that, and this is where a lot of times I have problems, I'm going to whip finish, and once I cross, make sure you don't cross and grab any of your fibers. And I'm going to wrap. I only need about 3 to 4. And that's pretty much it. I'm going to make sure I don't crowd the eye. And I'm going to go ahead and cut. So now, as you can see, the tail does not come off the hook shank going down like this. It's sticking straight out, and it's really not going up either. And it's pretty heavy. It's got enough fiber here to support the fly and create a balance. If you got hackle up here and you don't have a tail, your fly will lay in the water, hackle facing down like a parachute with the body sticking up. The mechanical aspect of a tail is to support the fly and counterweight the hackle. So if you don't have enough tail, then your fly is not going to sit in the water correctly, but yet you don't want it to point downward to where the butt of the fly is sticking up, even though it's sitting on the hackle. The hackle looks to me to be right at 1.5 the hook gap. We have 5 of our wraps all equal in rotation around the hook of the shank. The pheasant tail looks nice and smooth and tapered because I tied the pheasant in by the tip, and as you wrap forward with the pheasant tail going to the butt of the pheasant tail, it gets fatter, creating a natural taper, which is what you're looking for. So this is a dry fly. It is on the Bronze Achievement Program as a required fly, and The things that you look for is there's that tag of my thread. I'll trim that off, and that'll take care of the head altogether. We'll be good. Um, Always look at your fly 360 degrees. Don't just look at the one side and call it done. I don't have the right scissors in my hand to reach in and cut that tag the way I want it, but I will finish it up with another pair of scissors. So there you have it. You can now see, like I said, you can, let me rotate this, and you can see the body and the wraps. They're counter wrapped of the silver wire, and it starts directly on the bottom. If you can see right here, it comes off right there, and that's what you want. You don't want this wire to come off. You can see it starting. You don't want it to come off the side or the top. It's got to come off the bottom. So there you have it. Thank you again for watching. And this is, like I said, the dry fly variant of the pheasant tail.